Greetings! It is I, Tantus Naravan Dracovin, Lord and Emperor of the Dracovin Empire, and welcome! It is time to continue our discussion on the 5th edition of Dungeons & Dragons, 5th Ed D&D. Alright, so, where we last left off, we were talking about stuff in the Dungeon Master's Guide, the DMG, and of course we dived into social interactions and the steps as you, as a DM, have to take in the social interactions. Of course, you as a player have to follow these same steps, so they might be very related. Let's start with where we left off. We had been talking about, of course, what the purpose of the conversation is, and the starting attitude of those people. The check. That's where we're diving into right now. At some point in time, you're actually going to have to make a charisma check. No matter how well the conversation is going, there's always going to be some kind of role associated with it. Depending on the circumstances, depends on the type of check this is. Whether you're trying to be persuasive, deceptive, or just intimidating will depend on how the conversation has been rolling with the NPC. Of course, other players might have been involved in this, but whoever is at the core of the conversation will be the one rolling the check. The difficulty will, of course, depend on the attitude of who you're talking to, and, of course, what kind of thing you're trying to get out of them. That sets the base difficulty for this entire check. Certain things related to the conversation that you have done may alter this DC, may give you advantages. That's some of the reason why you might want to roleplay out a conversation to kind of build up to what is appropriate for this entire situation. Now that's where other players may come in. If you had other players in the conversation, depending on the actions they have taken and the words they've said, they might either offer you advantage on the check you're about to make, or it is actually possible that if they said the wrong thing, they could grant you disadvantage. If you have multiple friends helping, multiple allies, then it could balance out. Remember, you can't get more than one advantage, you can't get more than one disadvantage. As soon as you get one of each, you get none of them. They cancel each other out, period. They don't keep stacking and finding out how many. It's just more than one person helping, one harming. It just makes it a normal roll for you. It doesn't help, but it can happen. Now, there is also the possibility that you'll run into the need for multiple checks. This is more often related to something like you have multiple goals of the conversation, multiple things you want to get out of these people. Then you will need multiple checks. Usually, if it's one goal, one thing you're doing, that's one check. So it's very circumstantial for the multiple checks required for a social interaction. But you might still want to roll more than once. Even if it's one check that you're trying to make, maybe you fail it. Maybe you've done badly. Granted, you as the person that would re-roll the check, that's a little more difficult to explain off. The easy way to explain off is, let's say, the rogue character in a party is having a conversation with someone and makes a faux pas, basically corrects something, says something wrong. Another player at a much higher difficulty could come in and basically smooth over the situation, at least maybe a lower difficulty, smooth over the situation. Higher, maybe still convince the person to help you out, kind of fix things. This would be an excuse for multiple checks. You as the same person are probably not going to be able to easily do it. There are circumstances which always could come up where I could be in a conversation with, say, someone, I say something really terrible, i.e. roll my check really bad, they're kind of like insulted by what I've kind of pushed myself into, maybe suggesting certain things that I haven't really smoothed them over. It's not impossible to say I couldn't basically fix them up again. It's just that if I failed the check and I fail again, which it could be more difficult, it could be rather than them just refusing, they go to a more hostile attitude. I drop their attitude a little bit because I'm pushing the point too much. So there are always drawbacks to trying to do something like that, and they can be severe drawbacks. So it is better to say, you failed, fine, rather than push the point. But again, it's up to you how your character and how you think your character would have interacted in that situation. If your character would push it, do it. Anyway, let's move on from social interactions to role-playing. Now, I'm not talking about role-playing as a player. I'm talking about role-playing as a DM. Because role-playing as a player is something that we've discussed before how you're not pushing the point. If they dive into it, they dive into it. If they don't, they don't. The point of you role-playing as a DM is to make the immersive world. You want to make a world that your players want to kind of dive into. And doing that by playing out the NPCs and monsters is a great way. You don't have to be a master thespian. You don't have to be a master comedian. You just have to keep your players amused. And amused doesn't mean like rolling around laughing. Amused means entertained. You want to be taking on the roles of these players, these NPCs, these monsters, in such a way that your players looking at you are like, oh, that's awesome, that's cool. Oh, that's awesome, that's cool. Incorporating your story elements and the characteristics of these beings you're bringing to life are how you're really going to get that. The master acting, the master comedian stuff, if you have that, great. If you don't, those core elements are what you're going to use, making it feel like these things are real things. And that's one of the things. When you're bringing these NPCs to life, you want to make sure that they have the same kind of personality traits to a degree as your players. You're going to play up those traits, or at least an idea of those traits, the kind of bonds, ideals, and flaws. Using those is a good point and ground where it's like, this character has these kind of things. Here's how they would act, and here's how they would react in certain circumstances, making them more alive, making them believable. Also, look to making more unique traits that would cause interesting interactions with your players. A good example that the book gives, which I wanted to share with you, is, let's say one of your players is a wizard. You're interacting with an NPC, let's say a peasant this time, who had her entire family killed by an evil wizard. Maybe she blames all wizards. It doesn't matter if your hero, kind of great and powerful wizard friend is on your team, that your player is. She's going to be angry, hateful, blame him for something that he was no part of. It's a stereotype, but it's something that someone might do. It sounds believable that they're blaming all wizards or all spellcasters for something that happened that was terrible in their lives. This is another thing. An important part of this entire thing is a trope that writers get into, is you show, don't tell. That's a difficult thing to sometimes do. When I'm describing an NPC, keep it to the physical descriptions. Don't try to describe emotional things or attitudes. Try to display them. If someone is very selfish or self-centered, like especially self-centered, maybe they might try to commission paintings for themselves. They might try to take things first. You know, they might push them forward as being like a hero, but maybe they're only like the person that paid for you to do something. They're like, oh, yes, it was my idea all along to slay the goblins, when maybe they only funded your expedition to do so. The fact is that displays their character as very selfish nature or self-centered nature, and adds to that character and shows you that character, because your PCs are dealing with this guy doing this to them and acting this way around them, and you don't have to tell them it. You don't have to say, oh, this guy seems very selfish and self-centered. That's telling and not showing, and it's not entertainment, and it doesn't bring characters to life. And that's what you want to do. Bring characters to life. An important tool that you're going to be using is what I'm using now. Your voice. Your voice is going to be a major tool to you, because your voice can very easily convey a lot of information as a DM. A very basic ability of this is the volume of your voice. For example, if I'm being loud like this, it's an important way. Or if I'm yelling and screaming. Or if I'm whispering. That's a little loud whisper. But still, each of those tones conveys a different emotion to your players. Next is trying to do voices. And it's like trying to make each voice unique for everything they're encountering. This is something that maybe you want to try to mimic certain people or something. It's like trying to mimic Arnold Schwarzenegger. Or, for my example, if you've watched some of the role-playing games I'm a player in, I do Russian accent for tools. My Svrfnablen barbarian rogue. This is accent I have developed. Is it terrible? I know for a fact it's terrible. Would insult any Russian person that would meet me. But It's giving character to my character. That's the way they sound. That's the way they act. Granted, the acting part is part of the cadences and things you do as you say it. But adding voices into all your different characters can make them more unique. And that's another thing, is you should try to speak in such a way that reflects a character. Use simpler, maybe, like, rude terms for, like, a barmaid. She's not going to know anything smart. It's like, how's it doing, Governor? You want some extra drink? Just something simple? Or a refined, snobby person would say large, incredible words, much more exacting in their speak. While you could do something like a pirate and talk with, "Arr, you're a pirate." Or, let's say, ooh, Lizard Man. "You talk with a hiss, because you're a reptilian man." See? I've already done different voices that have made these characters unique. This comes into conversations between NPCs. Oh, talking with yourself is something that may come up in the course of adventure. It's difficult to manage, but what you really want to do is not focus on each other. It's, okay, rare circumstances. PCs are observing something, not part of it all. Then you have a conversation with yourself. It's weird and dumb, but could happen. Most of the time that two NPCs are having a conversation, your PCs are in the room with them and part of the conversation. They're a third party or even like a fourth party. At that point in time, focus the conversation on your PCs in particular. You can still have that conversation, but by putting them into the conversation. Like, for example, if a king is interrogating a bunch of people about what happened, they might sort of start with your PCs and the others will kind of answer after your PCs do. That's a focus on them. They're the first ones to answer things, the first ones to speak. Of course, then there's other ways of doing it, but just keeping your PCs at the focus is the important part here. Anyway, that's it for today. So I talked to you first. We finished talking about social interactions. The dice rolling multiple times. And then I started talking about you as the DM role-playing. In the next episode, we, of course, are going to continue with you as a DM role-playing and finish up talking about that before moving on to objects. That's going to be an interesting conversation. And combat from the DM side. Also an interesting conversation. But I hope you're having a great day. If you've had some interesting times where you've been either role-playing as a DM that you want to tell me a story about, or if you've been a player, let me know about some cool social interactions that you've had. Just how the dice rolls have altered how you played it out. Maybe you did really great role-playing, but your dice roll tanked it. Or you did really terrible role-playing, but your dice roll turned it around. I'd love to hear those types of stories. Remember to check out all my links in the description below, my Discord, Twitter, Twitch, Patreon, all the other great stuff I do and places to reach me and places to support me. And until the next time, I bid you farewell.